1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the JNewellness podcast. I'm your host, JNewell. Before we begin, I want to provide a trigger warning. Today's episode includes discussions about eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and mental health. If these topics are difficult for you, please take care of yourself while listening. And feel free to pause or come back when you're in the right headspace. I'm really excited today because this is my first interview with a licensed therapist. And today we're talking about a topic that's really important and often goes unspoken in the dance community: eating disorders. Joining me today is Donna Fish, a licensed clinical social worker, level 4 team CBT therapist and trainer, former professional dancer, and author of Take the Fight Out of Food. After spending 10 years as a professional dancer herself, Donna now helps people struggling with eating disorders, anxiety, trauma, body image, and performance anxiety. In addition to working with clients, she trains therapists around the world in the treatment of eating disorders, including leading trainings for Polish and Ukrainian therapists at a European conference. Therapists from South America, Cuba, and Mexico in Mexico City, and most recently presenting a paper at the World Congress of Cognitive and Behavioral Scientists in San Francisco. She also consults with the School of American Ballet, Juilliard, and NYU's dance department, where she teaches dancers how to survive and thrive in an industry that can place enormous pressure on both the mind and the body. Donna, thank you so much for being with me today.
Happy to be here.
First, I just want to start off by asking you how you are.
I'm
How's your
good.
summer been?
Oh my God, it's been fantastic. Really, really fun things going on with friends and family, and just had 2 weeks at the beach. So I'm very happy. It's my happy place, the beach.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love the beach. It's so relaxing.
yeah. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So, first, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm a therapist. I've been in private practice now for about, 35, 40 years. And I, you know, did a Bachelor of Social Work at McGill University. I'm from Montreal. And then I actually really started my dance career there. I started to dance professionally after that in Toronto as well as Montreal. And then I came to New York in 1982 to train with the Paul Taylor Company because one of their dancers was teaching in Toronto and said, "You should come. Paul's opening a school." So I figured I would come for just a little bit of time, a few weeks or months, and I ended up auditioning in New York and getting work as a dancer. So I thought maybe I should stay. But then, I ended up going back to school after dancing for 10 years. And, I thought I really wanted to develop a private practice, but I ended up as a basis working in psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital so that I could really get a good basis in understanding psychopathology. And then I did and I continue to do training and, the different therapy models that are always out there so that I could really be able to, in my private practice, offer people what they need instead of them having to fit what I do. So I basically could treat almost anything that walks in the door, although I do have a specialty and I'm known for eating disorders and trauma, and I do EMDR, so I get referrals for that. But I like to really treat what I say conditions, not diagnoses. So I like to look at really what is the problem that you're describing? How is it a problem? And then we figure out what we can do about it. And I have, tools and skills training from all of the different models of therapy that I've trained in, including CBT and psychoanalysis and psychodynamic theory and families. And I treat a lot of couples also. So it's not like we walk around with one problem going on at a time, right? We
Yeah.
always have many things happening at once. So it helps for me to be able to conceptualize things from a really big, wide framework. And then we could really figure out together and collaboratively, well, what do you want help with as you're walking in the door? What do you want help with the most? what do you want to happen when, what do you wish could happen when therapy is successful and you're done? And so we really kind of moved from there to figure out, okay, these are the methods we're going to use. And I do a lot of trainings, like as you were saying, and I like to train therapists because I think that that's an area that people really are lacking and is this specialty in eating issues. And so I really enjoy training therapists around the world, and I lead workshops as well on the internet.
That's amazing, Donna. I think that's such a great thing, especially because a lot of therapists, they get a license in whatever area of psychology it is, but
Hmm.
then it's a different thing to actually be with a patient one on one and kind of learn how to interact with them and make it more of a client centered approach.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it really takes time to build up the experience. But yeah, I really love it.
I was wondering what piqued your interest in psychology? Like, what was there a specific moment, maybe in your dance training, that you were like, "Well, I'm really interested in going down the social work route"?
So yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And, I have to confess that I just love connecting with people. And so I've always been genuinely interested in connection and in relationship, developing relationships. And I'm very curious about how people, I just about all of our differences and how other people, how everybody is. I'm just very genuinely curious. And so I had a professor actually when I was in college in Montreal who said, you should really go into social work because it's a good degree to have to develop, to do counseling and to do therapy, which is what you're interested in. And then I had danced and done ballet as a kid, and then I gave it up. But then I started dancing professionally again, and so I kind of gave up on doing that career. But I realized after my dance career that I did want to go back to school, and I got my master's, and I wanted to really devote sort of the rest of my career life, especially as you could get old. Um, and I really loved the fact that it was a career that I didn't focus on looks. It didn't focus on body. I joked that, when I got my first job out of social work school at the hospital, I was like, wow, I don't have to like worry about what I'm eating and how I look and all that. If I gain some weight, I'm not going to get fired. So it really kind of liberated me. And I became interested in working and doing training in the field of eating disorders because I myself, when I was a dancer, well, I was always on a diet. I always had this idea that there was good food, bad food, food I could eat, and then, that was not going to make me gain weight, and then food that I shouldn't eat because that would be fattening. And what happened was I would, end up sort of going into these sort of periods of time where I was really restricting food. And then if I wasn't auditioning for a show or the show ended, and then I would binge, and I would think, and of course I would binge because I would think, oh, this is food that I can't usually eat. I better eat it all now. And so when I stopped performing and I went, I was just working, and as I said, I could wear clothing and not get fired if I gained weight. I kind of retrained myself as I used to call it, I called it eating like a kid. Like the way you would eat when you were a kid, like you didn't think about it, right? You didn't think, oh, this is a good food or a bad food. You just ate. You ate what you felt like eating, and you were, when you were full, you were done, and you went off and you moved on to other things. And so I just really started to retrain myself to kind of go back to that more. It's sort of called intuitive eating now. But I really was able to be quite successful in sort of really changing those old diet tape loops, I call them. That's what I call them in my book, like that kind of narrative that we really can grow up with in a culture too that's very obsessed with body and, especially with social media. But it's the truth. Like, you know, our culture is very obsessed with body and with certain body types. And, there's always one fad of this is how you should eat 1 year and this is what you shouldn't eat like. And I just reject all of it. And I think everybody has their own kind of body and their own body type. And everybody has to figure out a way of eating that works for them because there is no one way to eat that's the right way. So I did that and I was interested in working with dancers and performers because I had come from that world. And I felt like I had a way of understanding that world and what people are up against, more than maybe people who hadn't been under that kind of scrutiny. And so I did a 3-year training program at the Center of Study of Anorexia and Bulimia. And then I started my practice from there. And I teach there, actually. I do a lot of teaching in that at Institute of Contemporary Psychotherapy through there.
I can relate a lot to what you were saying. I know you mentioned this also on the David Burns podcast about like kind of going back and forth between not being anorexic or having a binge eating disorder, but a
Right.
little bit of both. And
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
definitely felt that way in high school. I mean, I was a bit of a late starter when it came to dance, but I felt like there was a lot of pressure to be skinnier in ballet, but then
Right.
also like in society there's kind of this trend where girls want to be slim thick. So I was kind of like not eating as much one day and then eating more the next and not really sure how I felt about my body.
Right.
And something I've been thinking about a lot, and it definitely resonated with me as you're speaking, but like there's this kind of disconnect between the dancer and the art, and people only really see our expression of the art and don't really think about what really goes into it and how difficult the training could be and like what we're thinking about in our bodies.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. Well, people are seeing the outside of it,
Yeah.
right? And not knowing that our own connectedness to the inside of it and the inside experience of feeling your body. And I always say, I mean, emotions are actually felt in the body. They really are. And so the artistry also is the emotional expression, right? And the feeling also, even of the physicality, that's another aspect of it, and the artistry. So it is really great to be able to really connect with your inner kind of experience and inner life. And that's one of the things that I really try to help people who have eating disorders connect with more, because they have a tendency to be sort of split off from their body, their emotions, and to go on more of an external, like the shoulds. I shouldn't eat this, I should eat that, I should look like this, as opposed to what it's feeling like from the inside.
And it's actually really cool that you mentioned that because at Wesleyan it was a completely different shift. Like there was a lot more of a focus on actually connecting with your body, and it wasn't as much of the traditional dance training.
Hmm.
At first, I kind of felt uncomfortable. I was like, I'm not used to this. I'm
Right.
rolling around on the floor. I'm not really sure what this means. But it definitely allowed me to think about dance in a different way and kind of recenter it to my own body instead of focusing on what everyone else sees.
Yeah, yeah. Which can end up being transformative for your actual technique, believe it or not, because you end up being so much more centered and grounded in your body. So you're working within your own sort of sphere, and you could really connect with the musculature and the anatomy that you need to, rather than pushing and forcing your body into these shapes that, you're seeing from the outside in.
Yeah, exactly. And you're also talking about intuitive eating. I'm not really sure how to define what a healthy relationship with food would look like.
So I see a healthy relationship with food as when you're able to kind of balance. We have to be kind of thoughtful, right, about what our bodies need, right? I'm not at all extreme about that. I think I really reject this concept of healthy, quote unquote, versus unhealthy eating. I'm a big believer, and I write about this in my book, about sugar and junk food is equally important to healthy eating, because it makes your spirit and tongue happy, and having a balance is really important to help with being able to be moderate, and just to have balance is what's really important, and to learn how to take responsibility and feed your body well. But that doesn't mean perfectly. There's no need to be perfect, so that there's less pressure, because then it allows you to really connect with. Having a healthy relationship means that you can kind of think through like, okay, well, what does my body really need today? What am I going to need? Because sometimes we have to, be thoughtful, especially if you're going to be, taking class all day or rehearsing. You have to be thoughtful about like not eating too little. You have to make sure you get enough, stuff in your body so you can last throughout the day and focus. But, so you have to be able to say, well, I'm not going to get to eat for 5 hours. I better eat something now, even if I'm not that hungry. So you have to be thoughtful, like, and be able to predict ahead and balance things, so that you don't leave yourself too overly hungry, and, make sure that you can be centered enough and calm enough so that you can, or not, you can be anxious, but also if you're too hungry, it's really hard to think straight. And it's also hard to stop eating, and you end up eating past the point of fullness because it always takes more food to fill you up when you're overly hungry. That makes sense. So having a healthy relationship with food incorporates really kind of taking track of your own body, feeding yourself, but also not being too obsessive or too controlled about your eating so that you can go out and it doesn't impact you and prevent you from eating socially and going after pizza and ice cream and French fries and eating everything. Being able to eat everything really helps with moderation and helps reduce binge eating.
I remember in high school, like we would train for long hours. Like we would be in the studio for maybe 5 hours, like you were saying. And I feel like a lot of the girls were kind of fueled by that hunger. Like I have to perform my best because then I can earn that reward of a meal. How would you kind of restructure that way of thinking?
Well, I do that all the time because everybody who has an eating disorder comes to me has that way of thinking. The idea is I shouldn't be eating. And so, I mean, it doesn't actually matter what weight anybody is at. That every eating disorder or disordered eating, whether it's compulsive eating or anorexia or, binge eating, bulimia, they have this underlying belief that they shouldn't eat what they want to eat. That there is, again, good food, bad food, and that they should be smaller than they are. And that's kind of a core belief that ends up creating that kind of perspective creates, you know, certain emotions, like increases anxiety, obviously, and then creates different behaviors, right? It leads to either behaviors of like restricting food. And then sometimes, again, if you're always restricting food, that's, the extreme variance of that is leads to anorexia, which is where you then really land up with problems because, you can get hospitalized and you can die. I mean, people have died of anorexia. I mean, your organs shut down and your brain actually shrinks over time. I mean, it's serious. It's the one psychiatric illness that causes death, aside from obviously depression and suicide. But, in and of itself, anorexia can lead to dying. So is bulimia as well, and purging. But it doesn't matter what weight anybody is at, whether it's somebody who is, I've worked with, people who are like really, 300 pounds at 5 feet. And the one thing I make them commit to doing at the outset is eating exactly what they love. Like that's my first prescription because they've always been thinking I can't eat what I love. And it ends up creating a lot of compulsive eating. And so it's a very big mental shift. And it's so counter to our culture and our world and our families. So you've been raised in families where either you have to be, eating, finishing what's on your plate because food is love, or you've been raised with, parents who are very controlled, healthy, quote unquote, eaters, or if, you have parents who are overly involved in your food and very, restrictive. It just all boils down to the same kind of mindset, right? And we're surrounded. So it's very important to start by really looking at your own individual attitudes and what's your perspective and how is that setting you up to then behave in a way or split off because you feel so deprived. psychologically or maybe physiologically also, but even psychologically, so that you end up feeling like, oh, I blew it. I just had this, piece of cake and I shouldn't have eaten cake. So now I might as well eat, 5 pieces of cake and ice cream because I'm not going to do it tomorrow. And so the other piece is that in order to shift compulsive eating or any kind of eating disorder, you have to be willing to stop restricting. That's where I start. It's the most important place to start. I never start by trying to help people stop eating. In fact, that's the opposite thing. I actually help people stop restricting their food and making sure that they eat what they love. And in fact, I've been able to cure many people of long histories of bulimia and compulsive overeating with this method. And it really, really works if they're willing to do it. But it's hard because we're so indoctrinated in believing, oh, this is the way to eat. That's the way. This is bad food. This is good food. So it's hard.
And there are so many diets out there, but at the end
Exactly.
of the day, I think it's so important to just have like a balanced array of foods and not sacrifice the things you love. Especially, I love to eat pizza. I have pizza all the time,
Pizza's a
but
great food. It's a
yeah,
great, very nutritious food. It has everything in it. And actually, it's funny. I was on a panel. I gave a talk for Harvard's medical school for eating disorder, and the nutritionist who came on before me, she works with a lot of, people with obesity and want to lose weight. She said the thing I prescribe every day is 2 fun foods a day. And structured eating so that they have, you have to have breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, 2 fun foods a day. And that helps people lose weight. There's a real paradox here.
and there's more of a willingness to eat maybe a not as savory, healthy food if it's paired with something that you actually like. Like my mom actually used to trick me into eating vegetables by like adding mac and cheese because she knew that I would eat the mac and cheese.
It's good, the balance.
Yeah.
Yes, my kids are always making me eat more vegetables. I'm a terrible. That's how I got my kids to eat vegetables. I'd be like, oh, do we need a vegetable? They'd be like, yeah, mom, we need a vegetable.
I feel like I'm the same way with my mom now. Ironically,
It's
our
so
roles
funny.
have reversed.
Right. Exactly.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the triggers. Like, I know that you've taught seminars at NYU. I'm wondering if you've discussed any of the specific triggers within the dance space, maybe in the classroom, with teachers, professors, anything like that.
Um, So I did a seminar that I created at NYU for the dance department called Mental Fitness: How to Survive and Thrive in the Dance World, and also I taught it at Juilliard's dance department. But what I've noticed is that there is a real change, and you had asked this, and there's been a big change in the dance world and in dance training, and I find that there's much more, especially in modern dance programs. It really makes a difference. It really, really helps. Modern dance with way more forgiveness in terms of incorporating different body shapes and sizes as opposed to the ballet world. The ballet world is much more restrictive. That being said, even in the ballet world, there's been a big, big change. And so, like, for example, years, years ago, I think back in the late 80s, I was asked to come in to School of American Ballet, New York City Ballet's ballet school, brought me in because they had just started a full-time dormitory for their students for the school. And their dorm staff was really worried because their kids were throwing up in the bathrooms and they didn't know what to do about it. So they brought me in to consult with the dorm staff how to handle it. And because it was still back in the day where they were very strict, the head of the New York City Ballet School, not the school, the head of actually the company, came to watch my talk. And I could tell that she was there as the person to make sure I was not saying anything to encourage that these students were going to be gaining weight. We're going to be, eating in a way that was outside the boundaries of ballet. So that was really, interesting. And Over the years, however, I've noticed like I get referrals from the School of American Ballet from with students that they're worried are anorexic, and they'll put them on class restriction. Like if they're losing too much weight, they won't let them come to class. They've developed wellness programs. I've worked with Joffrey's wellness program also. And there's much more. And ABT also, Kevin McKenzie, I think, also was very helpful in terms of helping develop a wellness program for people with eating disorders. So over the last, I'd say 30 years, there's been a big shift, even in the ballet world, to really be interested in more wellness and health. And, you know, it has, I think, been a really huge thing because one of the only pieces of leverage sometimes you have in therapy, if you have somebody coming to you for treatment of anorexia and they're very thin and they're ballerinas, they really want to keep dancing. And that's the only thing that they're going to be motivated to do is to, okay, if I have to gain weight because I want to go back to class, okay, then I'm willing to gain weight. They don't want to gain weight. But then once they gain weight, I try to help them habituate to it and deal with their anxiety around it so that they're not as frightened by it and they can get more accustomed and maintain their healthier eating habits. So things have really changed a lot. And I think the teachers, in studios are doing better with this as well.
That's great to hear. I didn't know about any of these wellness programs or like the class restriction.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think a lot about it's kind of interesting actually because I went to a performing arts school and our dance department was pretty diverse in terms of size and like actually a lot of the better more technically skilled dancers were actually on the heavier side. And it kind of reworked the bias that I had in my head just from like seeing ballerinas growing up, just thinking that, oh, you had to be this tiny person to become a prima ballerina. And I know a lot of my friends had the same ideology, but it's also so important to be a certain weight just so your body can handle the pressure of dancing. Like you need that muscle and that fat to make sure you keep up your energy and you're able to actually execute the moves. And
Yes.
you had mentioned this earlier about anorexic people um like losing I forgot if you mentioned like losing bone density, but I know as women our estrogen decreases if we start starving ourselves, and then that could lead to osteoporosis and like then you're not going to be able to dance and like pursue your dreams.
Yeah, no, it's really, and okay, so when you stop eating and you stop getting your period, when you're at too low of, body fat and your weight, drops down, when you lose your period for a period of time, your estrogen is down and you stop making bone or in the same way. Because up until age 30, you're making double the amount of bone cells, you know. And so even though we lose a certain amount of bone cells every day, or I don't know, they're not called bone cells, forgive my lack of science knowledge, but the things that create bone, we lose a certain amount every day, but we double the amount up to age 30. But what happens when you don't get your period and you're low estrogen? You don't double that amount. And so, like, for example, I've worked with somebody and she's 11 and she won't get her growth potential. So if it's a younger kid, they won't even grow up to their potential if they got their period and then lose it for too long because they just won't get enough bone cells. And so they won't even get as tall as they would have been otherwise. And then the other problem, if let's say you develop it and you lose your period and you're a teenager and you've already grown, let's say, to your full height, is that, of course, you get bone loss, you get osteoporosis and osteopenia. Now, again, some of these things don't happen right away. And so they're often very abstract and people don't really care, right? Because it's too abstract. Well, I don't really care if I'm old and I have osteoporosis. It's just too abstract. So you got to find a way to make it very connecting. But the problem with too much restriction, and then even, sort of binge eating, or even especially purging. But even just being that very dysregulated, what it does is it slows down your digestive system. And so that does, it makes you have a bigger stomach because it takes longer for your food to digest. And then additionally, especially if you're purging, um, it makes your body actually bloat more. And so one of the things I always say is to people who come in the door, sort of like, I didn't realize it was your goal to have a bigger stomach and to bloat more. So often that catches their attention because, of course, they don't want to have a bigger stomach and bloat more. But those are very real things. I mean, you really can there are a lot of physiological consequences to very extreme eating and dysregulated eating. So it's really, really helpful to be able to start to regulate eating and eat more consistently over time. And that really helps. And all of these things you can our bodies are quite forgiving, and, healthy and resilient. But the bone loss can really last. When I worked at Mount Sinai Hospital in inpatient psychiatry, a 40-year-old woman was admitted for a hip fracture, but she was transferred to our unit for treatment of depression. And the minute she was admitted, I thought, wait, 40-year-old woman with a hip fracture, that should not be. And sure enough, she'd had a long history of anorexia. And that's why her bones were so brittle. No 40-year-old women are having hip fractures unless there's always a rule out. You want to look at that. And she was so entrenched in her eating disorder.
It's such a sad thing to see, especially like in media. I I always saw dance as such a high pressured, high stress environment. As much as I always loved the art,
Yeah.
there was that level of sacrifice at the same time. Like, kind of, in order to pursue this passion of mine, I'm gonna have to deal with that kind of scrutiny and how that's gonna affect my mental health and perception of myself at the same time.
Yeah, I think that that's a useful thing too, right? Because that's something, it is an additional piece, right? There's the navigation of your external self, right? How you look, your body, and that, there's always casting. It's like acting, right? There's casting. And so there's a level of reality of that. At the same time, how we navigate that emotionally is really important, and how you tolerate the distress and learn to cope is really crucial. And learning how to deal with failure, learning how to deal with setbacks, learning how to deal with rejection, and not sort of, throw away the baby with the bathwater, right? Like, not believe you're a total failure, right? Holding on to the good parts of yourself while in the middle of feelings of shame and feeling insecure and feeling rejected. That's very important. And it's sort of a bridge to what I talk about, which is that building self-esteem and self-confidence isn't about feeling good about yourself all the time. Like, that's just crazy, right? Nobody can feel good all the time. Like, that's just like weird. It's just not normal. So to me, it's all about, let's learn to be human beings together and accept that our humanity and our capacity to have a real range of emotions, from, all of negative emotions and positive emotions. But how do you navigate those? How do you sort of learn how to process those so that you don't end up having to use food or any kind of other behaviors or addictive behaviors to fix feelings and to avoid processing emotions? Because we all have, and it's the same thing with body parts and looks. Like, nobody likes all of the parts of themselves. Nobody has only good parts, right? We all have aspects of ourselves that we don't like, right? We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. That's normal. And so in the same way, I like to help people have a genuine sort of radical acceptance of, oh, I don't have to be perfect. Like, there are good parts, there are things that I feel good about, similar to bodies. Like, nobody feels like they love every part of their body, but they might like some parts of their looks and bodies. And people have a tendency to overly focus on the negative. That's what sort of our brains do because we're human beings. That's a natural tendency. So I try to help. Again, it's about balancing. And I call it having an ego leg to stand on so that when you're in the moment of the rejection and flooded with those feelings of like those bad, negative, oh, I feel so bad about myself. I really blew it, or that person's so much better than me. And you're really having that intense sadness and insecurity that you can also just tolerate the negative feelings and know, okay, at the same time, I also, okay, I'm going to use those feelings advantageously. I'm going to use them to my advantage to learn from that error I made in class yesterday or in rehearsal. Or I'm going to look at that person and I'm like, oh, what is she like? Let me try to learn from that. So I like to look at the negative emotions and say, what are the advantages, right? Like, what are the advantages of the anxiety you're feeling right now? And what are the great things that that anxiety or that self-consciousness or even feeling of shame says about you? Because if you think about it, if you couldn't feel any embarrassment or feelings of shame, what would that say about you, that you're incapable of that? Do you really want to be that person who's just like, oh, I'm perfect and I can never feel embarrassed or feel bad about anything I've ever done? Like, who wants to be close to that person, right?
Mm, Such a big part of our mission at JNewellness is the idea of turning pain into purpose. You were
Mm-hmm.
talking about
Mm-hmm.
sort of using your comparison and insecurities almost as inspiration instead of thinking someone's better than you, kind of seeing what they're doing well and trying to implement those same strategies into your own life.
And also a genuine acceptance of like the benefit of seeing somebody better than you, right? Like, do you really want to be the best one always? Do you want to be the big fish in the little pond? Well, then you're never gonna, I mean, in
You're never
dance,
gonna grow.
especially, you're never gonna have a dance career, right? And you're never going to go to Wesleyan. You're never gonna, like, you're not going to even, you're not going to have an aspiration. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, if you really just want to stay and have a very small, narrow world and be the best because that makes you feel good, I am not judging that. That's fabulous. But if you have aspirations to continue to grow in your professional life, right, and keep getting better, well, you have to surround yourself by people who are just as good. That's why it's really tough. Like, when the people at Juilliard brought me in to develop this program on mental fitness, they said, because the dancers, they're the best in their town. Everybody who comes here is the best person in their high school, in their town, and every day, right? Because they are, right? That's what it takes to get into Juilliard or, NYU or, whatever program you're in, and especially in New York area, right? So, so, but it's a big mental shift because if you don't have the tools mentally to cope with how do I deal with feeling not as good as, right? And how do you look at that and see your insecurity as advantageous? What are the benefits? I always like to look at a negative emotion and say, okay, what are the benefits of that feeling of insecurity? What is a benefit? And what is the really beautiful thing it says about your core values, too? Like, oh, you have humility. You're not so arrogant that you think you're only the best at everything all the time, right?
Yeah.
So I like to help people connect to emotions and all of the emotions that usually people who develop eating disorders want to avoid, those negative emotions, fix. I like to let's look at those emotions and look at the beautiful things they say about you and they make you proud. Anxiety. Well, feeling fear, like that's amazing. If you're willing to feel scared, if you're willing to feel distress, if you're willing to feel rejection, it says you're willing to take a risk. And is that something you admire about yourself? That you're willing to do that. So I like to always really start with that and get very specific about it, about every individual person and what their issues are, what they're saying they're wanting help with. Because people especially start therapy thinking, oh, I want to change this. I really want change. I want to help this. But I like to look at what are the good reasons you haven't changed up until now, because there's always good reasons. And we want to hold on to the good reasons and the advantages first. Let's just get rid of the negative, the additional stuff.
As you were saying that, I was thinking some more practical ways to kind of work on reducing anxiety and addressing those insecurities, because if you avoid those feelings, they're going to come back at a later point. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No need to avoid. Yeah. But what is your question again?
what are some practical ways to kind of cope with those feelings?
Give me an example of a moment in time when you're struggling with any of one of these feelings you're describing. Give me a moment in time. So this is a good key. It's a tip. Ask yourself, what is happening in this moment in time that I'm feeling insecure or feeling anxious or feeling sad, whatever it is. So give me an example, like a moment in time that you're saying, you know, what are some strategies? So that's a strategy.
Okay, one example for me, because I'm an econ and dance double major, and I'm not much of a a finance person,
Uh-huh.
more of an artsy person. Um, but I mostly chose that major for my family. Sometimes I'm in those classes and I feel out of place, and I'm like, I don't understand anything that's going on. Everyone seems much more intelligent than me. And I sort of harp on those emotions, and makes me think that I'm not capable, and I kind of shrink myself, and then I end up not participating
Hmm.
as much as I'd like to.
Great, great example.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So one of the things I like to do is, so it sounds like in that moment, tell me, I'd like to ask, you could ask yourself, okay, how anxious am I feeling? Like at the moment, the situation is that you're in econ class, you're hearing other people talk, and what you're believing and thinking is these people know so much more than I do, right? Or
Yeah.
something like that, right? They're better at this than me, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And that thought, so that's the thought. So one of the things that's really useful to really figure out and separate out what is the thought? What's my perspective? Because your thoughts, your perspective is going to make you feel the way you're feeling. So that is a major tip I'm giving you. Is that's your roadmap. So you can do what I call a data dump or like unpack. Wait, because you could be in the same situation and not be feeling bad about not knowing what's going on, or you could be freaking yourself out and shutting down and not open to learning, right? You can be freezing, like your mind freezes. So it depends what you're telling yourself. So you can ask yourself, what am I telling myself? Well, I'll never learn this. Like, so you could really like start to really ask yourself, wait, what's going on and how anxious is it making me feel? How bad about myself or insecure is it making me feel? And you could even, rate like, oh, I'm feeling extremely, like really like 90% anxious when I'm in this moment. Now, what we know is when you're feeling really anxious is that it puts you in fight or flight response. And that makes you freeze. It can make you either freeze or just shut down. You can't think straight when you're so anxious. So you can't learn. And you can also, it sounds like you can look at then also, what are then my thoughts that are very self-defeating? Like I'll never learn this, right? Because often we spiral, right? The way you described it, that's what it's like, a spiral, right? And these are what are called automatic negative thoughts. They're ends. Every human being, okay, I want to normalize this for everyone out there. Don't feel like you have to be different. This is normal. The most important thing is to know it's called sort of mental awareness or, mindfulness is really knowing, wait, what's actually going on right now with my brain? What am I telling myself? Now, most of us are very unconscious of what we're thinking because we're so used to believing it. We think of these thoughts as like core beliefs, like they're like our religion. Of course, I'm terrible. I'm a failure. Blah blah blah. Right? I'm no good. I'm not. I'm not good enough or whatever. So really knowing, right? Those are my ends. The good news is our brains are really plastic. We can move our brains into another direction. So it's not about changing that. It's about knowing, wait, oh, right, I'm thinking this. I'm shutting down. I'm not learning. And then going, oh, wait a minute. What are the benefits of this? Well, maybe I don't want to learn this. Is there any benefits to stopping learning and getting an F so that you can drop out of the class and say to your family, like, you know what? See, I can't do this. You want to look at like, what is this? It's called secondary gain. There might be some good reasons to shut down and stop trying, right? Or to sabotage yourself, right? So
Yeah.
you first have to look at like what might be some good reasons I want to keep telling myself, or benefits of continuing to tell myself I'm a failure, I can't do this, right? Before you move on to change it. But if you then start like, well, actually, no, I think I'd like to keep learning, you could then look at, well, is the way I'm thinking very black and white thinking, right? That you're like, oh, I'm terrible at this. I can never get this. I can't learn this at all. Is it shutting you down, or is it helping you say, of course, these are people who like this is their major, and they've been doing this. And yeah, there's always going to be people better. It's sort of the equivalent of being in a ballet class and you see everybody else can do, lift their leg up to here and your legs down here. It's the same thing, right? It's the same. We do the same. We have the same automatic negative thoughts that can sabotage us from trying. But then some days are really crappy, right? And you've just had a bad day. And it's okay to feel crappy. And all you have to do is let yourself go down, feel bad, and then say, okay, tomorrow's a new day. You know what? I'm not going to you don't want to get stuck in it. You want to hold on to the good thing and the positives about feeling bad. It's okay to feel bad. I don't want people to think they have to feel good all the time or feel good about themselves all the time. That's not normal. It's about navigating. Think of it, emotions are like weather systems.
I know you've been mentioning it a few times throughout this interview, but could you sort of explain, I'm forgetting what it's called, like the triple paradox. It's like a way of thinking where like you ask yourself the the positives of believing a negative belief.
Yeah, yeah. What is the benefit? Oh, so give me an example of one of those thoughts you had in econ class.
Oh, there are many.
Give me one. One
Um,
negative thought that drives up your anxiety.
when I don't score as well on an exam.
I don't score. Okay, so
Like,
sometimes as well, I don't. So sometimes it's important to be specific about a thought. Like, okay, well, when you're telling yourself, I don't score as well on an exam, like be specific. What exactly are you talking? You don't score as well as who? As everyone in this class on an exam? Like you're like what try to be very specific in your thoughts, because if you're very overgeneralized in your thinking, it's just going to make you feel bad overall. But try to, and this is a good tip, be really specific. Like, wait, what am I thinking when I'm telling myself I don't score as well on any exam? Like, what exam? Who? Like, be specific. So that's a method.
I know my professors usually say what the class average is, and then they'll say like what percentage scored above or below. And when I'm below the class average, then I start thinking, oh, there must be something wrong. Maybe I'm not studying hard enough.
So you're making an assumption there must be something wrong, and you're deriving that. So the fact is, in that moment in time, just the fact that the event, right, the thing happening that's creating your emotion, it's your perspective, and that is creating your emotion because you're thinking with the circumstance. What you're saying, there must be something I'm doing wrong. Okay, so well, going back to your original question, there must be something I'm doing wrong with my studying. Okay, what's the benefit of that thought? Is that a thought that you can take action, that you can do something, you have some control, like some power? It can help you. Are there any advantages of thinking that? There must be something I'm getting wrong or I'm not studying enough. Is there something you can do differently? Are there advantages?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
could definitely reach out to the TAs or schedule a meeting with the professor.
bingo. That's a good example of the benefit first that of a negative thought. That's I call it a productive worry thought or negative thought because you could do something. So that's the advantage of it. And then you make a plan. So then make a plan. Exactly. So you don't have to change that thought. You can just accept it and say, oh, I'm really proud of myself. I'm doing something about it. I'm going to try to work on, I'm going to get more help. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And just kind of tying that back into eating,
Hmm.
like how would you kind of structure a plan with a patient? Not not so much like a diet plan because that's not necessarily helpful, but kind of just a way of approaching those thoughts of starving themselves or binging.
So first, there's different components. First, we have to work actively with the food. And so I want to know, I'm not going to do, I mean, we're not going to only look at thoughts and feelings without paying any attention to actually what you're actually putting in your body because um, you can't, if you're not eating enough, your brain's not online. And I got to help people's brains get back online. That's really key. But it really helps me if I really can ask people, like, what are they eating like? So I just start with where they're at and know, okay, well, what are you eating like? Because it helps give me a lot of information about, oh, there's a good chance that because you're not eating enough between, you binge the night before, so you think you better not eat the next day. So you wake up, you're kind of full and you're not that hungry. So you don't eat breakfast, you don't eat lunch, but by 4, you're getting hungry. And then the minute you start eating, it's hard to stop. Like I first start by really also really getting a good idea of like, well, how are people eating? And I try to not make too big changes. I don't like to be too radical. Like sometimes, like honestly, it's kind of cool. Small little changes really can add up and make a big difference. So I, you know, if people, if you think of making a big radical change in your life or your lifestyle, then you're not going to do it. You're not going to be consistent. So I like to also fit it into people's lives and into what works, what's doable and realistic and what also fits where their head is at and what they're willing to do. Because I can't just give somebody a prescription. I've got to really work it in. It's a collaborative.
That makes sense. As we're almost approaching the hour mark, I kind of wanted to shift it into a discussion of how you would discuss disordered eating with a parent or a professor and what people in those positions could do to help someone who's struggling.
So it's different with a parent than a professor,
Yeah.
right? And but I work with parents all the time because, and again, it depends on the age of a person because, but I do a lot of coaching even with young, um, like let's say it's somebody who is a later teenager, adolescent teenager, and then, even a younger person in college, because if they're back in their family, like first I try to help them navigate their parents with good communication and stand up for themselves and hold space for themselves while they're also, holding space for their parents, but also creating some boundaries so that they can, hold on to what they're learning and how they're doing. And I try to help parents be less freaked out so that they're not less anxious and help, like all parents are just trying to do the best thing for their kid, even if it is on the outside looks awful and is really not productive. The they're not doing it to hurt their kid. They're doing it because they want their kid to succeed. They want their kid to be happy. And so I come at it from a empathic understanding and compassion and parenting is hard. So I offer a lot of empathy, but also some coaching and support for them so that they can do things a little bit differently, so that they can allow their kid to set some boundaries, and also to make sure that I'm really putting safety mechanisms in place, and I make sure that there's a medical doctor in place, especially if there's an eating disorder and it's people are really symptomatic. They have to have a medical doctor because I don't want to have to worry about people changing quickly because they can't. And I don't need that to happen. But I need to make sure they're safe physically And so I'm in charge and I'm the bad, the doctor can be the bad guy and say, you know what, you need to come in once a week to be weighed, or you need your labs done, or you can't do soccer now because your potassium is low because you were, throwing up or whatever. So I got to I said, I put a team in place and I make sure parents, they don't have to worry so much, and I help them so that they could be less anxious and then they can be more connecting with their kid instead of always just focusing on food so much. And with teachers, it's different because, teachers might have to say, you know what, you can't come to class and you need to make sure you get a medical doctor. And so I would talk to teachers about making sure there's a medical doctor or that they have to have clearance to come to your class. Like, what teacher wants the liability of a kid fainting in class, you know? So giving the support to the teachers is important, and strategies.
I guess to kind of close it off, looking back at your journey as both a professional dancer and now as a therapist, what's one thing you wish every young dancer would have been taught about food, body image, and self-worth before they began their dance career?
I would just hope desperately that nobody starts dieting ever in their lives. Diets are the way to have an eating disorder, are the root. It's often the way people develop, and even disordered eating. So I would say, please don't ever overly deprive yourself. And, you know, weight fluctuates, just like, our feelings fluctuate, your weight fluctuates. You want to, not try to get too stuck in behaviors that are limiting you, but to just really not overly, really be careful to not overly limit any foods, especially foods that you like. So that's something I would say.
That's great advice. Is there anything that you would like to plug, whether it be a little bit about the book you published or any workshops you might be leading anytime soon?
Sure. So the book that I wrote, I actually wrote it because the way I was working with people with eating disorders was curative. It was curing people, but then sometimes they'd come back and say, "Oh my God, I'm pregnant. I'm having a kid. I'm so scared. I'll pass along an eating disorder to them." And so I actually had this idea: if I could put into a program what I've done with them and in our work together, and give it to them as a parent, then they could prevent their kid from developing an eating disorder. And so I have a friend, I knew this guy from my kid's preschool. He was an agent. I told him the idea. He said, "Oh my God, it's a great idea." We wrote up a proposal, shopped it around, got 3 bids on the book. And the book is actually a parenting book on how to prevent and solve eating disorders. But with all of my clients and patients, I say, read it like you're your own parent, because there's real methods, especially in the 4-step program, that really help you connect with your own body, how to separate hunger and fullness from other emotions. There's strategies with, rating scales for food, fullness and hunger, rating scales. It's all about how to connect. And then the step 4 is a decision sort of matrix of how to think about, eating and make decisions around food that you feel confident around. And there are going to be different decisions all the time. And like, for example, I called it "Don't eat around the bush." Like, if you're thinking, "Oh, I want, a Snickers bar, but I shouldn't have that," get the Snickers bar, because like otherwise, after the apple and the yogurt and the salad or the this or the that, or if you'll be at the Snickers bar 5,000 calories later. So have the Snickers bar first. Don't eat around the bush. So I just say there's a lot of tips and a lot of really good information in the book, and it's on Amazon. You can get it on a Kindle. You could order it on Amazon. And I'll publicize, workshops if I do it, but I mainly do workshops for professionals, for therapists, not really for patients, workshops. But there's, you could hear me on the podcast that's on my website. I'll put yours on my website too once it's up and running. And I've written 1 million articles on Psychology Today and Huffington Post also, along with the book. So I have a ton of information out there. And you can access it through my website. Everything is on my website.
Thank you so much, Donna, for joining me today and sharing your expertise. I know this conversation is going to help so many dancers, parents, teachers, and anyone who's ever struggled with body image or their relationship with food. And thank you to everyone for listening and tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe to the Just New Wellness podcast. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And share this conversation with someone you think could benefit from it. Remember, if you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder or body dysmorphia, you don't have to go through it alone. Reach out to a licensed mental health professional or eating disorder specialist for support. If you're in the United States and you're experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 or call 911 if you're in immediate danger. Recovery is possible, asking for help is a sign of strength, and most importantly, you're never alone. Thank you.